and it's like the pioneers of experimental econ, which is great. But it was a over 70-year-old host and an over 70-year-old co-host over Zoom. That was a thing.
Okay.
We are live.
Perfect. A second. All right.
Over 70-year-old host. I don't know.
Okay. Give it a second, see if anyone else joins before we get started.
Danielle, are we taking questions from YouTube today?
I believe so. We'll still end it a little bit early, but then, so that way our Accepted Society members, Julia and whoever else joins, we can chat, but. All right. Should we go ahead and get started?
Yes.
Awesome. I can start us out. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Academics in Conversation. For anyone who is new here, this is, think of it like a live podcast that we do with the team that runs Accepted Society through Accepted Consulting. If you are like, what in the world is Accepted Society? Think of it as like the dream community you wish you had to help bring people together as we navigate this weird academic world, for everyone from pre-community college student to community college student, all the way through my level, and I am post-PhD and I'm an assistant professor. We do these once a month, and we do them about topics that are related to issues that we deal with in academia. Today, we're going to be talking about self-care in academia. It is midterm season. We are a little bit over halfway through the semester for most of us now, which it feels kind of crazy that we're only halfway through and crazy that we are already halfway through. So Katie and I were talking, and we wanted to talk about something that we are all probably struggling with right now, which is self-care and what self-care looks like depending on your academic stage. So to quickly introduce myself, my name is Dr. Danielle Lawson. For those that don't know me, I also go by Balanced Academic on Instagram and YouTube. I am the head of academic and career planning at Accepted Consulting, and I'm also one of the co-founders of Accepted Society. But when I don't work for Accepted, which is just a part-time job for me, I'm a full-time assistant professor at Penn State University. So I've been doing this academia thing for quite a little while. Katie, what about you? Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everybody. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Katie. I'm the head of the Transfer Admissions Department here at Accepted Consulting. I started working with Accepted in January of this year, and I started working with Accepted Society a couple of months ago. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice today. I'm currently a senior at UC Berkeley. I'm a transfer student myself from Sacramento City College. I'm currently studying anthropology with a concentration in archaeology with the intention of going on to do research in cultural resources management. And I am also known as the Vintage Academic on social media, on Instagram and YouTube, where I talk about the transfer process and life as a transfer student.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katie. And we also have one of our wonderful exclusive members from Accepted Society today. Julia, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
So, hello, everyone. I'm Julia. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in political science at Florida State. I am Italian, so I got my undergrad and my master's in Italy, and then I moved here for my PhD. And yeah.
Thanks, Julia. So for those of you who are like, why is Julia part of it? She's one of our exclusive members. We are broadcasting on YouTube so everyone can watch, but our exclusive members get to be a part of the conversation as well. And then about 30-ish minutes in, after we take a few questions for YouTube, we will actually transfer to just having a conversation between the three of us and any of the other exclusive members who are able to join us later in the hour. So if you want to be a part of that, definitely check out Accepted Society. So like we mentioned, we're going to be talking about self-care today. I'm going to kick us off with an introductory question, and then Katie, you can talk about like why it's important. But I am curious for everyone on YouTube and everyone there, Julia, how do you define self-care?
Would you like me to start?
Sure.
Self-care is actually something that's very difficult for me to define for myself because it looks a little bit different depending on where I am. Sometimes self-care is just going and having fun, which is something that I've realized lately, that I've been focusing so much on my academics that I've forgotten to have fun and do things with people. But it's also important for me to recognize that self-care is doing the mundane maintenance tasks that I'm also not very good at. So for me, it's defining it's very hard, and it takes a lot of flexibility and ability to recognize where I'm at in the moment.
No, absolutely. I would agree completely. I think it's very, it definitely depends on where you're at in the moment. At first, so if you had asked me like a few years ago what self-care looked like, and I would reflect what you kind of see is like what used to be the stereotype on social media. So like a spa day or like a bubble bath or having dinner with friends and stuff like that. But I've come to realize as I've gotten older and I'm in different stages of my life that sometimes self-care is like saying no and going to bed at a reasonable time. Or like you were saying, Katie, like just like some of the maintenance tasks that we need to do, getting up and moving around. I mean, sometimes it definitely is like those like luxurious things that I mentioned, like a bubble bath or like a drink with friends or something like that. But definitely in COVID, I've realized that it definitely changes a little bit. What about you, Julia? How would you define self-care for yourself?
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's very hard. I would define it as any activity that centers myself. And so be it admin things that I keep procrastinating on, taking a bath, going to bed, taking a nap. Though it's very hard as a PhD student, realizing that taking that spot of time is actually very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost self-care to make time for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And we definitely welcome anyone on YouTube. If you have a different definition, please feel free to share. But yeah, I think we've hit the nail on the head. Like each person who defines self-care is going to define it differently, because it is, like you said, Julie, you said it really well, like centering yourself and what you need for yourself in that moment. So I really appreciate that definition.
I do too. I think any act that centers yourself is a very good, succinct way of explaining self-care.
Exactly. I love it.
It took me a while to realize that was the main thing in self-care, because as you, Danielle, said, I saw self-care as doing a face mask, but not, taking a nap, which is
right.
Odd.
Right, exactly. Or like showering every day, brushing your teeth, and depending on what part of your life you're in, sometimes those things are hard. Yeah. But it's important to center yourself that way.
So now that we kind of have an idea of what self-care is and what it might look like for some people, maybe we should talk a little bit about why self-care is important in the first place. Because we talk a lot about taking care of ourselves, but what does taking care of ourselves do? I mean, there is that basic, we take care of ourselves so that we can live and be human beings that exist. But some of the really important aspects that I want to highlight about, performing acts of self-care are things like, first of all, it can just be fun. Again, like if you're lacking that fun aspect in your life, I think everybody needs a little bit of fun, regardless of what fun looks like for you. It could be going out dancing with friends. It could be reading a book. It could be playing a tabletop game, but having fun is really important for humans. Another thing I wanted to point out is that self-care prevents burnout. And we've talked a lot about burnout in these conversations, especially as academics. If you're in community college, if you're an undergrad, if you're a PhD, academia and learning and education takes a lot of time and energy. And so burning out is something that I think happens a lot in this community, or, in this academic space. And so, taking care of yourself is one way to prevent or counteract burnout. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is that acts of self-care combat mental health problems. Now, having a mental illness, taking care of yourself isn't going to cure it, but it's definitely one of the aspects of taking care of that mental illness space, how you deal with it and cope with it on a daily basis. And also not taking care of yourself can lead to things like, situational depression and things like that. So I know that when I don't take care of my space, it makes me feel worse. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. But Danielle, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really appreciated that you started with talking about like preventing burnout. And another thing too, if anyone watching feels burnt out, a lot of times it's hard to cure burnout, but that's a way to help make yourself feel better. And how you need to navigate life each day is going to change. And we've seen it probably now in the past 2 years more than ever as a global society, like what, you know, stress on a like community level does to us as we navigate this pandemic. Regardless of how you feel about it, it's still just been a stressful presence in our lives. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic there was a really good conversation about like, we are in a global pandemic. Like, if all you can do at the beginning of the day is like wake yourself up and keep yourself healthy, that's perfect. But I think as we've become a little bit more accepting of the pandemic and the fact that we are just living with it now, and in some ways we're becoming tired of the things that we need to do to prevent the pandemic, we are not doing as great of a job of recognizing that we're still in this space of being in a pandemic. Like, I don't know about you, I get super burnt out turning on the TV and looking at numbers of COVID numbers, like people who have passed due to COVID, vaccination rates, all of it is exhausting. And so I think it's an important thing to consider, particularly for those who are in midterm season. You're doing it through a pandemic, and we're just learning how to exist in general. Mm-hmm. So no, it's definitely important. And, I always bring in the research side of things, but you also mentioned, Katie, that it can be fun. And we know that like having fun is such an important part of having a good quality of life. It's something that they study in my field. Typically when people have fun, it results in a little bit of laughter, and laughter is something that they've marked as like, that's what really helps you build a better quality of life. So yeah, no, self-care is like beyond important, especially for all of us in this weird academic space. And I would even consider these conversations personally as an act of self-care, because of like navigating these conversations and having the conversation about it and being in community with one another helps, academia feel less isolating. Julie, is there anything else that you feel like you would like to add about like why it's important in your opinion?
One tiny thing is that I had to learn is that self-care is productive as well. Because if I don't recharge, I will not be productive in my own work. And again, being in academia is very hard to equate resting with being productive, but it is. And then it leads to burnout and it links to that. So that's the only thing I would add. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great way to put it too. You're like our like go-to now of like the definition for self-care. And then you just added about it being that, it is productive as well. All right. So moving on a little bit, we wanted to talk about how self-care looks for academics and students, and what does it look like and how it looks different on everyone. So it definitely looks different for everyone. If you had asked me a few years ago as a student what self-care looked like then I would have answered something very differently than now. And a lot of times my self-care in this stage of life that I'm in as a faculty member, it's learning to say no and setting up boundaries. In fact, this past week, I'm laughing, I had to advocate for myself for a lot, which was difficult. And it meant that I was setting boundaries. So for me right now at this stage of my life, as I'm learning to navigate this new career stage and like what it means to be a professor, for me right now, it's learning to say no and set boundaries and to not feel guilty about setting them, which I'm still working on. Katie, what would you say in your stage of academia?
Yeah, so the reason why I wanted to address what self-care looks like in academics versus students is because we do welcome all students and academics from every stage in their academic career. So as a student currently, an undergraduate student, and also especially as a senior who feels like she might be suffering from a little bit of senioritis, taking care of myself has been a little difficult because I'm also at a university like UC Berkeley, which can be very competitive. And although my department isn't competitive in and of itself, there's still kind of that environment that fosters the feeling of I need to constantly be doing something in order to be like good enough, right? So for me, it is taking the time to slow down and acknowledge my own progress that I've made and the things that I am doing and realize that I have a busy schedule. And part of that has been taking up journaling for me lately. And that offers me a moment of reflection to be able to say, like, you're doing a lot. You should be proud of yourself and, acknowledging the fact that you're doing all of this hard work right now. In addition to kind of like that, taking care of myself mentally and emotionally in that way, I have also learned that it is okay to lean on support systems. So I know something that I bring up a lot in these academics and conversations is my neurodivergency, but as somebody with ADHD, self-care tasks and maintenance tasks are actually really difficult for me because they require a lot of executive function that I don't have. So I've learned that it's okay to accept and lean on support from my friends and family. So I have my fiance who he comes over and he helps me clean the house sometimes, and learning to not feel guilty about that and learning to not assign morality to the fact that I need help doing my dishes has been really big for me. So those are really the two, is taking the time to reflect on my progress and learning to accept help without assigning morality to it. Yeah.
Julia, would you have anything that you like to add into your stage as a doctoral candidate?
One thing I just want to note, Katie, is great that you learn to rely on your support system as an undergrad, because it took me way longer to realize that I need help for things, and you can rely on other graduate students or undergrad. So that is amazing. The thing for me right now is having one day off a week and not feeling guilty of taking that day off for whatever thing I want to do. Is it cleaning the house and go taking a walk or whatever? That day for me is important, but I do have to learn to not feel guilty of not working for a day, because as a PhD candidate, it feels like you need to publish and do things, and that day might be that you could spend working, but it's not productive.
That's a great point. I actually do the same thing too, Julia, where I have one day a week that I don't work. It's been a little bit different this last week or so, and it'll probably be different the next few weeks. But that's because I have some exciting things coming up and I want to take off some time around the holidays to move, and I have family in town and that sort of thing. But typically I do not do anything on Saturdays, and I don't schedule things on Saturdays. Katie's seen me flex that boundary and I have a hard time doing it, and it's uncomfortable sometimes because I want to give to others. But no, absolutely.
And if I could offer advice to any undergraduate students listening, I would say to follow in Julia's footsteps, because as undergrads, and especially during midterm season, spending that much time studying and working on your coursework is again a really easy way to burn out, and that's what senioritis is, right? So even if it's not an entire day, because I do acknowledge the fact that midterms can be insane, especially at a school like Berkeley, taking half a day or a morning to just go sit and drink a coffee or something in the dining hall or take a walk through campus or something like that is really important.
Yeah.
And to that point, it took me a while to realize that there's diminishing returns on how much you study before midterms and finals. Mm-hmm. So that extra amount that you're not working is not actually, it's more important to have less amount, more quality time than quantity. So.
Yeah. Exactly. Research actually shows us that studying with hours on end, which is how we start to panic and feel like we need to do, is actually sometimes not productive. But that's how we're told to do things and how we think we should do them. So that's what we do. But yeah, no, absolutely. It looks different depending on the stage, but there's also a lot of commonalities. And I think that's important to recognize too, right? That you might be different for each person, but it's dependent on that person. It's not necessarily dependent as much on the career stage, because we also have some aspect of learning to say no, some aspect of taking time for yourself, learning on support networks. And it's important to recognize that we are all humans and we all need to refill ourselves, and that's going to look different for all of us. Some of us need more self-care than others, and that's okay too. It's all about what we need in the moment. So with that being said, we can talk about some other types of self-care. So we've named some of the obvious ones. but we also wanted to touch on a few others so we can like popcorn around them. So like Katie and I made a list here, and we have some ones that we identified, but definitely add any in the chat if you have ones that you want to add. And then Julia, of course, please feel free to pop in if you have any that you want to add. And Roshni as well. I know you're not showing on the screen, but one of our other exclusive members is here, and please feel free to add some different types of self-care. So one of them is just entertainment, having fun, going out with friends, maybe, however that looks for you, watching TV. For example, for me right now, was something my husband and I do. We started it during the pandemic. So during 2020, we didn't want to we were nervous about Halloween, being around people, and just like understanding COVID in general. And so because of that, we're like, how can we celebrate it being Halloween time? And we also live somewhere that's like not in a neighborhood. So we weren't going to see like a bunch of trick-or-treaters. So we decided that for the entire month of October, we really like horror movies, scary movies, that every night we have a list now that we would watch a Halloween movie of some sort. So that means that I turn myself off at 8 p.m. every night. That means I also get up at 6 a.m. and start work then usually. And I watch a movie with my husband. And that's something that we do, and we really enjoy doing it. We always have the conversations in the morning of like, hey, what movie do you want to watch tonight? Because we have our list. But the one rule we have is that on October 31st, we'll watch The Nightmare Before Christmas, because then after Halloween time, in my world, it's Christmas time, because I love Christmas time, the nostalgia of it. So we always watch that one, but we've been doing it this year too. So like that's one way that we've been having fun for us right now. And it's time with him too, which is also self-care for me.
It's so funny that you say that, because before I moved to Berkeley, when my fiance and I were still living together, because now we're a little long distance, unfortunately, but our schedules did not overlap very well, because I had classes all day and he worked really late at night, whatever. For like the 2 hours that we were both awake at the same time, we would eat dinner and watch a couple episodes of a TV show together. Mm-hmm. And that got us through most of last semester, because it just gave us something to look forward to every night. It was a break from work and school. And we also got to share in something that was really important to him, which was Star Wars. So it was really exciting to be able to like engage with that together.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And we also, because we love this now, we're continuing this. And so now we have a goal, like November 25th through December 25th, we're going to do it with like holiday movies, because we just like it. We like movies, and it's a fun thing to do. That's not expensive. That's the other part of it, because we're watching movies that we have access to. So that's definitely one of them.
So one of the things that I think we've touched a little bit on, but I'm curious if anybody has anything more to say about it, is setting boundaries. Because for me personally, I've been having a difficult time with setting boundaries, and I have found that is where I am failing in my self-care, because I have been going home on the weekends a lot to take care of my mom and not taking care of my house, or I've been adding extra lab hours to my weekly schedule, which means I'm not eating lunch, and so on and so forth. So setting boundaries and what that looks like.
That's a good one.
Issue, so please, Danielle, enlighten.
No. I was gonna say, go ahead, Julia. What do you
have? I have the same issue as Katie. So please, Danielle, enlighten us.
So yeah, no, absolutely. So it has taken me well into my 30s to even or being in my 30s to even begin to understand what boundaries look like for me. It took a lot of self-reflection of figuring out like, what are those boundaries, and looking at myself and being like, okay, when I am functioning at my best, what does that look like? Like, what are things that work really well for me? One of those is, like you were talking about, Julia, something that I do too, is having one day off a week. Because if I have one day off a week, that allows me to just like completely disengage. And so then when I realized that, I was like, it's only one day. Like, nothing is going to like fall apart in one day. And if something is going to fall apart, then that's the exception that I make, right? You can always make exceptions to it. So that was a boundary that I set for myself, but it's something that you have to learn and, figure out for yourself, like what works and what doesn't. And boundaries are flexible, but you get to decide when they're flexible. And you don't have to give any reasons for that. You can just tell people, I don't work on Saturdays. Like, for me to function at my best, I don't work on Saturdays, or whatever it might be. And Rajni, you put in the chat, you also really struggle with boundaries and taking on too much. I also had to make it like very systematic for myself of being like, okay, like service, which is something that we get rated on as faculty members. I love to serve others. That's how I show love, through acts of service, feeding people, like all of that. Like that for me is like what I do. It's a part of the culture that I was raised in. But because of that, sometimes I will pour too much into people and it's too much of a good thing, essentially. So I have to set myself rules that I'm like, I can only have 3 service responsibilities this semester. And that will change if I have one service responsibility that's a little bit more than the other, but I'm doing what I'm supposed to and still setting that boundary. So that's what I've done. Another boundary that I have set is, you mentioned this, Julia, is that, writing is a big part of the academic job, particularly once you're in grad school and once you are a faculty member. And so one of the things that I do is I set a boundary of like writing time, and I literally block it out on my schedule. So if people look at my schedule, it shows that I'm busy during that time each week or sometimes it's been each day, it depends on my schedule. That's a day that I sit down and I focus on writing, meaning I'm not easily available over email. I set an out of office message. Actually, I am not scheduling meetings, and that's the day that I'm focusing on writing. Sometimes that day looks like I'm just like dead on the couch because it's like I can't focus on writing because I've just had a crazy week and things have happened outside of my control, but it's giving myself that healthy boundary that I need. So that's what I recommend. It's like really reflecting, being like, what do I look like when what is going on in my life when I'm functioning at my best self, and how to bring some of those things in there for you and not being ashamed to do it, because others will set those boundaries for themselves too. So that's what I would say for sure. Another one too, which we have talked about, is taking care of basic needs. That gets forgotten about with self-care all the time. So like brushing your teeth, washing your face, going to bed at a reasonable hour, whatever that reasonable hour looks for you. Or so let's not say going to bed, a reasonable hour, getting the amount of sleep that you need to function at your best each night. And then waking up at a time that works for you.
For me, it's having clean laundry.
Yep.
Laundry is something that I struggle a lot with. So finding that support system that I need to get my laundry done, very important for me.
There you go. Yeah. I was gonna say cleaning a house. I always make the joke that what my mental state is like by the way my house looks. It's like an outward expression of my mental state. If my house is clean and like tidy-ish, I mean, we're not like clean freaks over here by any means, like for me, I like, then that I'm doing well. If it is a cluster in my house, then that that's what's going on internally.
Right. Actually, in terms of cleaning, because I know that that's kind of something that's difficult for a lot of academics, because again, I think things like taking care of your house is setting a boundary. It's saying I'm going to set aside the time to do this, and that's going to take time away from my academics. And that is setting a boundary, but something that might be useful for people, because it's been useful for me. There's a book that's called like How to Clean While Drowning. And it's written by a person who is she's a licensed therapist, and she deals with people who have neurodivergencies like me, but it's really meant for anybody who's dealing with any kind of barrier that's preventing them from getting their house clean. So whether it's just you're really busy, you're in a PhD, you have depression, or you have ADHD like me, that's a resource that I think you can turn to. And it's also a very short read, so it's not going to take a lot of time to get through it. And so that's something that I've been using.
Thanks for that suggestion. That's great. I'm definitely going to pick that up. And Rajni, thanks for your chat that you put there, that you've been started outsourcing house cleaning because having a clean home helps your mental health. And that's something I want to touch on, because that's something that I was doing. Now, I understand that for some people, they may not be in a place in their lives that they can afford to outsource house cleaning, but that's something that my husband and I were doing for a few months. He recently had a job change, so then we couldn't focus on that monetarily. And then we're buying a house. There's a whole thing there. But for a while there, we were also outsourcing our house cleaning. And I had a really guilt-ridden time with it, thinking that I was like, this makes me bougie and high maintenance. But the reason, when I had a conversation with my mom and a few others, and I realized the reason we were outsourcing house cleaning is because I'm at a point in my career where I am super busy. And so for me to even take the time to like 8 p.m. shut off and watch a movie. That's all I have time to do right then. The last thing I want to do when I have that free time is go clean a house. And so then if I'm not cleaning the house, my husband then has to clean the house. And then it just becomes like a really mixed bag of like, that's all he's doing on his free time, which isn't fair to him either. So we had the realization that like outsourcing cleaning was just like what we needed to do. And then that's okay.
It's a tool. It's a tool.
Exactly.
It's nothing else. Yeah.
Exactly. It has no moral value associated with it. And because we're in a stage of like saving money, because we're buying a house, we now set aside like time to clean. And we said like, you do these tasks, I do these tasks, and it's an agreed upon thing. So it's split. But once we are in a place that we're living in our house and we have a little bit more stable, like we're not having to save for like a big down payment, we'll be outsourcing again, because having a clean home is a big part of mental health. So that's just something I wanted to touch on. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Roshni.
And if I may, on outsourcing, getting groceries delivered, like Instacart. I have a dog, getting a dog sitter for the days that I spend in my office.
Yes.
Those are all outsourcing things. And on cleaning, this is one of the, I clean when I'm particularly stressed. So I would say, try not like take care of the extreme. Like I know when my mental health is, it's bad because of a deadline or whatever, I reorganize my like bad drawer in the kitchen. Just be aware of like the, on one end of not cleaning and the other end of cleaning too much, which is my thing. I procrastinate on work by cleaning and organizing.
And Julia, you bring up another important point, that there's a spectrum in cleanliness. And if your system for keeping your house clean doesn't look like the picture perfect Instagram photo, that's fine. As long as it's functional for you, that's what's important. So like my laundry's in the middle of my living room right now, but that means that it's not on my couch, it's not on my bed, it's not, all over my desk. It's in a pile in one spot, and that's where it's going to be until it gets done. But at least I know where my dirty clothes and my clean clothes are. So as long as it's functional for you, like cleanliness it's a spectrum. So it doesn't have to be perfect all the time, and it doesn't have to be messy all the time.
Exactly. And it's flexible.
As long as the system works, especially when we're particularly busy, for me, it's a mental load that I don't have. If I know if I'm either outsourcing or I have set times of, I know roughly how much it takes to clean my house, and that I set it aside, it's a mental load that I don't have to think about it.
Yep.
While I'm working, and that's very useful.
Exactly. Another good type of self-care, which this one is, I think sometimes it's becoming a little bit more obvious, I think, in society, but I always like to find ways to mention it, is therapy. Therapy is a great form of self-care. Therapy can look different for each person. Not everyone likes traditional talk therapy. Not everyone can afford, unfortunately, traditional talk therapy. Some people have resources from other schools, some don't. But having time for therapy has been a huge part of self-care for me. And it has changed as my journey with my mental health in academia has changed. There are times where I don't need to have therapy every single week or even every month, but then there are times that I need it, and that's okay too. But that's a really important form of self-care that I think we would be remiss not to mention, for sure.
Absolutely.
And then there is also exercise and outside time, movement of your body, not necessarily for any goal, but to just move your body in a way that is enjoyable for you. We know that is like one of the best natural stress management tools. I remember when I was told that the first time in therapy, actually. And we also know that spending time outside, just 15 minutes of it, research will tell you that it does incredible things for people's mental health. So that can be a walk in a city. If you're in a city and you don't like being in the woods because that makes you uncomfortable because you don't like bugs, or you just don't like being outside, or you don't feel safe, whatever it might be. But then for some people, that might be that they just need to be in the woods, in the middle of nowhere, in the silence. Some people, they want to listen to music while they're outside. It can vary. And I think the theme that we keep coming back to is that this looks different for everyone, for sure.
And for me, something that I coincidentally did when I moved to Berkeley is I don't have a car and I don't have a bike, because I don't have the space for either, and I don't have the money for a parking permit. So I walk to school every single day, and exercise is also, not only is it just important for your body, but it is also really helpful for mental illnesses and neurodivergencies. Exercise for me, an ADHD brain struggles to regulate dopamine, but exercise helps in the creation and processing of dopamine. So the 20 to 30 minute walk that I sometimes dread on my Tuesday mornings, because I have to walk from one end of campus all the way to the other end of campus, is usually what leaves me feeling good for the rest of the day. So I've accidentally kind of set up this system where I do have to leave my apartment every day. I do have to walk every day, and I do have to spend time outside. Unfortunately, I'm in the Bay Area and it's raining all week right now. So going outside is a little uncomfortable, but I'm still outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the other things that we wrote down in our list is alone time or quality time with people that matter to you. So we wanted to mention both because sometimes it depends on how you refill yourselves. Do you identify as an introvert, an extrovert, an ambivert? It depends on each person. But sometimes just like sitting in silence was great. For me, I am an ambivert for sure. But I made the joke because I used to just like alone time that during COVID, I never realized how much I wanted to socialize with people, like, and just like socialize in a group and spend quality time with others. And then there was also times like love my husband dearly, but I was like, I just need to be alone in a house without you because we've been together in this same space for months upon end. And he would say the same thing. So both of those are definitely something I wanted to mention.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yes, and for me, part of my support network is my fiance. So the acts of service that he does for me, but then also just the fact that he's here because I spend 5 days a week without him. So,
yep. Or another thing that I think is important to mention: accepted society. That is time and community, just doing work together, and it's amazing how much it changes. Like for me, even my motivation and how I do work. By just being on Zoom with people. That's how, people always ask how Kaylin, Katie, and I met. It was through social media. And we still to this day do things like we will send group text messages like somebody working, here's the Zoom link. And we're just like working. Sometimes we're having random dance parties as a break, but just like being in the presence of somebody else helps a ton. So.
And I never realized how much I would love and get like excited to see familiar faces in accepted society, like running the accountability workshops. When I see people I recognize coming and getting to chat with them and continuing conversations that we had last week or hearing the members talk to each other, I didn't realize how much I would enjoy that. It really does get me excited. And that I think it's just a part of the community.
Yeah, exactly. Kaylin and I nerdily text each other how much we love accepted society all the time. Like it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, I think that's like wraps up most of what we have for today. We do just have one ending question / challenge. I know many of us have talked about what self-care looks like for us, but our question is like, what can you do to make it a regular habit in your life? If you changed one thing today, even if it's just this week, what can you do to make it a regular habit in your life, both on YouTube and in here? So, Katie, how are you going to make it a regular habit in your life?
I think the first thing that I need to do is find space in my schedule where I can say no and stop overscheduling myself so that I have the time to do my dishes. So, because it's been a challenge because I'd say the last month, the weekends are usually the time when I get things done. But over the last month, my weekends have been busy or I've had something to take care of at my mom's house. So I haven't had the space that I usually have. But that's also telling me that my system isn't working at the moment, because if I'm relying only on my weekends, then that means that everything during the week is, if something happens, then that means nothing's getting taken care of during the week. So I think I need to make some kind of shift to make some space in my weekly schedule.
Yeah, I love that. What about you, Julia?
I think I need to take your example on the writing days, maybe one day a week and just have that time and close my email. That is the worst part for me, thinking that if my advisor sends me an email, I have to reply within 5 seconds, otherwise I'll fail out, which it's not true, but the guilt in academia for that is extreme. So I need to do it once a week for 2 hours.
Yep, absolutely. It's always that reminder that if they really need you, they know how to get a hold of you other than email.
Yeah.
So if it's make it or break it, they know how to get a hold of you.
And when they are busy, they're not reachable all the time. So
exactly. Half the time we're doing so much ourselves anyways, so that we're like, oh shoot, we need to check in with this person anyways. And then Rajni, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add in the chat of something that you think that you can do to make self-care more regular in your life. For me right now, for myself, it's going to be because I know November is such a busy month for me. It's maintaining those like 2 hours of doing something with my husband each night. That it's 2 hours that I don't spend like faffing around doing nothing, because eventually I get tired and it adds up to definitely more than 2 hours a day that I'm doing nothing. But having that time with him to just like decompress has been like great. So, well, I don't see anything on YouTube. So I think that brings us to the end here.